Beneath the streets of Vatican City, locked behind steel doors and guarded by Swiss guards in Renaissance uniforms, sits a collection of documents so vast, so mysterious, that for centuries the Catholic Church refused to let anyone see them. And when you hear what historians finally discovered inside these forbidden vaults, you'll understand why the Church kept them hidden for so long. Because the truth, buried in millions of pages of parchment, letters, and papal decrees, doesn't just challenge what we thought we knew about history, it rewrites entire chapters of human civilization. And this isn't some conspiracy theory or wild speculation. This is documented fact, verified by scholars who spent years fighting for access to one of the most secretive archives on Earth. The Vatican Secret Archives, now officially renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archives in 2019 perhaps, to shed the sinister reputation, contains over 53 miles of shelving, packed with more than 35,000 volumes of catalogued material. And that's just what they admit to, with some documents dating back over 1,000 years to the 8th century, locked away in climate-controlled chambers where the air itself is carefully monitored to preserve paper that witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the burning of heretics, the signing of treaties that shaped continents, and the private thoughts of popes who held more power than kings. For most of its existence, these archives were absolutely forbidden to outsiders, sealed by papal decree, and anyone who tried to peek inside risked excommunication or worse, because the Church insisted these documents were too sacred, too sensitive, too dangerous for ordinary eyes, and that secrecy naturally bred rumors that grew wilder with each passing century. Whispers that the vaults contained proof of Jesus having children, evidence that the Church orchestrated assassinations, records of deals with the devil himself, blueprints for weapons of mass destruction from ancient civilizations, and while most of those tales are pure fantasy, the real contents of the Vatican archives turned out to be just as shocking, though in ways that historians never expected, because the truth is often stranger and more complicated than any conspiracy theory could ever be. The story of these archives begins in 1612, when Pope Paul I officially established them as a separate entity from the Vatican Library, decreeing that certain documents were so confidential they needed their own locked facility, and for the next 2.5 centuries, absolutely no one outside the papal court was allowed to enter, not kings, not scholars, not even bishops unless they had explicit permission from the Pope himself, and the Church offered no apologies for this secrecy, arguing that matters of faith and papal correspondence required absolute privacy. But the real reason might have been simpler and more human. They were hiding their mistakes, their scandals, their failures, all the messy, complicated reality of running the world's largest religious institution for 2,000 years. The breakthrough came in 1881, when Pope Leo 3000 made a shocking announcement that would change historical research forever. He would open portions of the archives to qualified scholars, though with severe restrictions. Researchers had to submit requests months in advance, specifying exactly which documents they wanted to see. They had to be approved by Vatican officials. They could only view 3 folders per day. They couldn't bring any bags or recording devices into the reading room. And they absolutely could not photograph anything, making the research process painfully slow. But for historians who had spent their entire careers dreaming of accessing these forbidden texts, even these limited conditions felt like a miracle. What they found inside those first open sections was breathtaking, not because it contained earth-shattering conspiracies, but because it contained the raw, unfiltered correspondence of popes dealing with real political crises, personal doubts, diplomatic disasters, and moral compromises that the Church had carefully edited out of its official histories. And suddenly the grand narrative of papal infallibility started to look a lot more complicated and human. One of the first major discoveries that stunned the academic world was the trial documents of Galileo Galilei from 1633, the famous astronomer who dared to suggest that Earth revolved around the sun rather than standing at the center of God's creation. And while we all know the basic story, that the Church forced Galileo to recant his heretical views under threat of torture, the actual documents revealed something more disturbing. The cardinals who condemned Galileo weren't stupid or ignorant. They understood his scientific arguments perfectly well, but they made a calculated political decision that preserving church authority was more important than scientific truth, and you can read the Pope's private notes wrestling with this decision. Knowing that Galileo was probably right, but fearing that admitting it would undermine the entire foundation of church doctrine at a time when Protestant reformers were already tearing Christianity apart, so they chose institutional survival over truth. And Galileo spent the rest of his life under house arrest while astronomy advanced without the Church's blessing. And this pattern of political calculation over principle appeared again and again in documents that the Vatican clearly never intended the public to see. Then historians found the correspondence related to the trial of the Knights Templar, that legendary order of warrior monks who became so wealthy and powerful during the Crusades that they essentially operated as medieval bankers. And the official story taught for centuries was that the Templars became corrupt devil worshippers who deserved their brutal suppression in 1307. But the Vatican documents told a different story. They showed that King Philip IV of France owed the Templars an enormous debt he couldn't repay. So he convinced Pope Clement V to charge them with heresy, and the Pope's private letters reveal his deep guilt and uncertainty about persecuting men he privately believed were probably innocent. But he went along with it anyway, because refusing a powerful king could split the church, and hundreds of Templars were tortured into false confessions and burned at the stake while Philip seized their wealth. And the Pope's anguished letters written late at night by candlelight show a man who knew he was committing a terrible injustice but felt trapped by political necessity, giving us a window into the moral compromises that powerful institutions make when survival seems more important than righteousness. The archives also contain stunning revelations about the Church's role during World War II, specifically regarding Pope Pius XII and his response to the Holocaust. And this has been one of the most controversial questions in modern history. Was the Pope silent about Nazi atrocities because he secretly sympathized with fascism, or were his reasons more complicated? And when the Vatican finally opened these wartime files in 2020 after decades of pressure, historians found a complicated truth that satisfied no one. The documents showed that Pius XII received detailed reports about the mass murder of Jews. As early as 1942, he knew exactly what was happening in concentration camps, yet his public statements remained frustratingly vague, speaking about suffering people in general terms without specifically condemning the Holocaust. And the internal memos reveal his reasoning. He feared that speaking out too forcefully would provoke Hitler into invading Vatican City, would endanger Catholics living under Nazi occupation, and would accomplish nothing since Hitler obviously didn't care about papal condemnation. So Pius chose quiet diplomacy over public protest, secretly ordering monasteries to hide Jews, using Vatican resources to forge documents and smuggle refugees, helping to save thousands of lives through covert operations while maintaining official neutrality. And whether this was moral courage or moral cowardice remains debated, but the documents make clear that the Pope was neither a Nazi sympathizer nor a hero, just a calculating politician trying to navigate an impossible situation where every choice led to someone's death, and his private prayers found tucked into files show a man tormented by the weight of decisions that no human should have to make. Perhaps the most fascinating discoveries weren't about grand conspiracies or political scandals, but about how the Church actually functioned day to day over the centuries, the mundane paperwork that reveals surprising truths about medieval life, like the letters from bishops complaining about priests who got drunk during Mass, or petitions from towns begging for protection from bandits, or detailed financial records showing exactly how much the Church charged for indulgences, those controversial payments that supposedly reduced time in purgatory and helped spark the Protestant Reformation. And seeing the actual price lists with different rates for different sins makes the corruption feel visceral and real in ways that history books never captured. You can see that murdering someone cost more than adultery, that rich nobles could buy forgiveness cheaper than peasants because they donated more. The whole system laid bare in columns of numbers that church officials never meant for future generations to judge. The archives also contained the proceedings from the Inquisition, and while the Church had always downplayed the brutality of these heresy trials, claiming they were measured and just, the actual records tell a different story. Detailed descriptions of torture methods, transcripts of interrogations where terrified men and women said whatever their torturers wanted to hear, execution orders for crimes as minor as owning a banned book or making a joke about the Pope. And what's striking is how systematic and bureaucratic it all was. Every torture session carefully documented, every execution approved by proper authority, evil carried out not by monsters but by administrators who genuinely believed they were saving souls by burning bodies. And reading these files forces us to confront how ordinary people can participate in extraordinary cruelty when they're convinced their cause is righteous. The Vatican Archives also revealed surprising moments of mercy and doubt that the Church edited from its heroic narratives, like the letters from Pope Gregory IX, who in 1233 issued a papal bull associating cats with devil worship, which led to mass killings of cats across Europe, and historians now believe this may have allowed rat populations to explode, helping to spread the bubonic plague that killed half of Europe in the 1340s, and tucked away in the archives are later papal communications acknowledging this horrible mistake, showing church officials privately admitting that their superstition might have contributed to one of history's worst disasters, but they never issued a public correction or apology, just quietly stopped mentioning cats in their decrees and hoped everyone would forget. And this pattern repeats throughout the archives, private admissions of error that never became public accountability, because institutions protect their reputations more carefully than they protect truth. Researchers also found extensive correspondence about the donation of Constantine, a document that for centuries justified papal authority over all Western kings, claiming that Roman Emperor Constantine had given the Pope temporal power over Rome and the Western Empire in the 4th century, and the Church used this document to crown emperors, depose kings, and claim vast territories. But in 1440 a scholar named Lorenzo Valla proved it was a forgery probably created in the 8th century. And while the Church eventually acknowledged this, the Vatican Archives revealed that officials knew about problems with the document much earlier, but continued citing it as authentic because it was too politically useful to abandon, showing again how institutional power often trumps honesty. What makes these archives truly remarkable isn't just what they contain, but what they represent about the nature of history itself, because we like to think of history as a clear narrative of events that happened a certain way. But the Vatican documents show us that history is actually a contested space where powerful institutions carefully curate what gets remembered and what gets forgotten, what gets celebrated and what gets buried in locked rooms for centuries, and the Church isn't unique in this. Every government, every army, every institution with power does the same thing. They write their version of events and suppress contradictory evidence, which means that much of what we think we know about the past is actually just the story that winners decided to tell. And the real value of the Vatican Archives opening up isn't that they exposed some grand conspiracy, it's that they gave us a more complete and honest picture of how the Catholic Church actually operated through 2 millennia of triumph and failure, holiness and corruption, courage and cowardice, and in doing so they revealed something profound about human nature itself, that even institutions founded on the highest ideals of love and truth will compromise those ideals when power and survival are at stake. And maybe that's the real secret the Vatican was trying to protect all along, not evidence of supernatural evil or hidden mystical knowledge, but simply the uncomfortable truth that the Church is and always has been a human institution run by flawed people making difficult choices in impossible circumstances, sometimes choosing right and sometimes choosing wrong, but always protecting their own authority first. And understanding this doesn't destroy faith, it just makes us see religious and political power with clearer eyes, recognizing that no institution deserves blind trust, and that the only way to prevent history's mistakes from repeating is to keep demanding transparency, keep questioning official narratives, keep opening locked archives, and forcing those in power to confront their own documented past. The Vatican Archives remain partially sealed even today, with many documents still classified, especially anything less than 75 years old, And who knows what future historians will discover when those files finally open, but one thing is certain, the truth will keep emerging one document at a time, one uncomfortable revelation at a time, reminding us that history isn't written in stone but in paper and ink and human choices, and the story is far from finished. So if you want to see what other secrets get pulled from locked vaults and what other comfortable historical narratives get challenged by documentary evidence, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started uncovering the stories that powerful institutions tried to bury. And trust me, the truth is always more interesting than the myth.